Hello everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to tell you about our two courses, Science and Society and Process and Practice in Science, that we run here at the University of Nottingham. These are courses where we embed ethics, problem solving, and above all, communication in our curriculum, something that we found to be really important as students leave at the end of their third year if they're finishing with a BSc, or the fourth year if they're ending up with a master's in science. So I'm speaking on behalf of myself and Sophie Everson, but actually reflecting a wider range of teaching colleagues here at the University of Nottingham that have developed this curriculum. So the overarching aims of these two modules, run by Sophie and myself, are really centred around the understanding that scientific discoveries are very much not isolated from the societies within which they exist. And we want to explore the interactions that exist between the science that is done, the scientists that do that science, and the society around it, through a series of interactive lectures, discussions, and presentations. One course really builds upon the other, so the fourth year course really builds upon that in year 3. The overarching aim is to give students the tools to understand what ethical, responsible research and innovation is and what it might not be, and to explore and challenge their own views, and to practice articulating them to different audiences. So as an example, I can say that my third year course this year will be articulating their views to a politician and trying to explain what does and doesn't matter and what should be prioritised, particularly under challenging economic circumstances. So taking the first course then, Science and Society, I hope you can perhaps see this course outline here. We start off by talking about the historical and cultural perspective within which all science takes place. And by that, I mean we're able to look at where science happens, how the scientific process itself has changed over the years, and where we sit now, with the sense that we can do better and we must do better. We then follow these lectures up by discussing things like, how does society keep scientists under control? And I ask my students, do you trust me? Do you really trust me to go and do the right experiment when I leave this lecture theatre here? We talk about science and the environment, and we link that to, for example, the Conference of Parties, COP meetings, and where they will be held next year. I'm wondering if you as an audience know where it will be held next year and who actually will be sitting on the welcoming party and how many oil giants potentially those people represent. It's an interesting read if you haven't already. We then go on to talk about ethical frameworks and theories, a really important topic. How do we work out what is and isn't ethical? How do we work out upon what basis we are making our decisions about what is and isn't okay? We then look at what happens when it goes wrong. Whose fault is it? Who decided we could do the science anyway? And what can our response to it be? And what is right and what is wrong? Who gets to decide? Who gets to decide how many risks we take? And who gets to reap the rewards of the benefits that we might accrue from it? We have a particular session on human ethics, talking about what it means to be human and should the rules be any different? Are the rules any different to what they would have been if we were talking about, let's say, a farmed animal or a new crop type that a farmer wishes to plant? We then follow this up by thinking about who is making the decisions in the context of citizen science, who is an expert and who isn't. And finally, we finish up with the formal concepts of responsible research and innovation, how we feel about the frameworks that we all exist as part of, and why hopefully we don't have to rely on individual trust that we might have in an individual scientist to behave in a certain way. This really sets the framework, I think, for students to consider and think about all the science they've done up to this point. I get to ask them, how much laboratory waste do you think you generated during the course of your scientific journey to date? How did you feel about cloning a gene in E. coli in the first year? How do you feel about the data sets that you've been looking at as part of your studies? How do you know they were ethically collected? Are you responsible for the conversations that you've had with people along the way that might inform the kinds of experiments they go on and do in the future that you might or might not agree with? And so hopefully this really sets the scene for subsequent courses, because ultimately we want students to be able to know if they are talking to another scientist, do they trust them? Do they have to believe in that trust? Or is there a framework upon which they can rely? What happens if my values differ from yours? Where does that put me? And how should I respond to your different approaches? Ultimately, who decides what is allowed and what isn't? And often that comes down to priorities. So where does the money go? Who is funding the science that is taking place? Who is taking the risks and who is taking the rewards? And whilst we're at it, who owns what comes out of the science, whether it's scientific insights or an actual product? And what is an expert anyway? Finally, and the main message really of the course, I think, and what I would personally say is the most important part, is that students understand to what degree they themselves are an expert and upon what basis they can make that judgment. I often tell the whole class, you are the grown-ups now, and we need you. We need you to use your scientific training to solve problems. And we hope we've given you the framework and the skills to communicate, whether it's written, verbal, whether it's by short pieces of sort of a tweet style comment, or whether it's a long essay. We hope we've given you the skills to find your voice, to say what you think matters, and to know where you sit amongst a sea of other scientists who are also trying to solve the same problems as you. What's really fantastic, I think, here at Nottingham is that we're able to couple this course with a fourth-year course led by Sophie Everson, which follows on from the Science and Society start, but develops and deepens the discussions and focuses very much on articulating them to understand that however good your technical skills are at this point, and we hope they really are quite good, and however complicated what you're looking at is, the data set or the equipment, you need to know that being a scientist means more than that. And you need to know what you're doing and why, and understand how we're assessing, in fact, what is excellent, and because that will influence the science of the future that is allowed to take place. And all of this really happens in a set of student-led presentations to develop the skills to evaluate what is good practice and what is not. Very much the focus on applying the skills, reflecting on the science that is done, reflecting on the imprint that they have left behind, not just in terms of actual, for example, laboratory waste and the implications of that, but actually the conversations and the insights that they have shared and the journey that they've been part of. We try and focus very much on trying to learn from the past in doing this, knowing that we can always do better. I tend to use examples that have come out since the last time I lectured, examples of good progress, examples of thoughtful comments that have come out since I last spoke to the students. And in essence, we pick up on what is going in the world around us. So here are just a small number of examples that Sophie has picked. So for example, the idea that scientists are colluding or that are working in a way that is against society is very, very important idea to address and be honest about, and try and find a way to counter. We also look at who knows what. So for example, how many MPs have a degree in science? How many of them would actually know what a p-value was if you were talking about distributions of data? And there are plentiful examples where words can be very important and significant in affecting how people view what is taking place. A small number of Trump's quotes would be enough to fill an entire lecture course, I feel. But you can also look at the differences between the public and science and how people view things. So rulings in the House of Lords regarding human rights and conflicts of interest where we have, for example, one entity, so let's say adult human, versus something that could potentially develop into human, such as an embryonic stem cell. And how do we look at the ethical principles of autonomy, justice, fairness, and well-being in all of these examples? We also look at honesty, and fundamentally, I think this is the training that we're giving our students. We look at areas where it hasn't gone as well as it might, and we ask how we can do better. And examples where now AI is being used to really, on a different scale, detect science that really shouldn't have been published is one such example. So the insights that we have gained and that we would like to share are really a reflection, particularly perhaps coming out of the COVID era, to say that students do not always feel as expert as perhaps they should, and perhaps they have not had as much of a chance to practice talking about their science as they might. But courses that encourage interactions and reflection on what they've done can actually be very empowering, and teaching students that they are really well equipped to make decisions both within and outside the scientific arena, actually. It's also a fun thing to teach, so giving students tools to evaluate what should and shouldn't happen is fun, and that would be my overriding message. I'm a population geneticist by training, and this has by far and away been the most fun aspect of teaching that I've had the privilege to be able to develop. It also allows students and staff involved to explore and challenge own views and to articulate them and practice in a safe space, articulating them to different audiences. And also, finally, finding one's own voice takes time. It's really worth it. And therefore, having a course, I think, that effectively spans over 2 years for those that go on to take the 4th year, I think is really valuable. So I'd just like to finish by saying thank you very much to RSB for the opportunity. And thank you very much to all the colleagues, perhaps some of whom are in the room where you are now, and for informing the science that I and others do here, and informing our teaching to make it the best practice that it can possibly be. Thank you.